let's see if we can't clear up a little bit of confusion with the Wisconsin, Wyoming trigger guy's video about the SIG 320 and the trigger pull. In that video, he admits, right, by his own admission, the trigger is pulled 1 millimeter past the wall, and then wiggling the gun manages to make the striker release. Now, a lot of people were very confused about this and assumed it meant SIGs were unsafe. Previously, I posted a video showing with a Glock you can make it do the same thing, and people were upset by that for a variety of reasons, but we'll see if we can't address some of those here. First off, in the Wisconsin, Wyoming, whatever, W State gun guy's video, he admits trigger was pulled 1 millimeter past the wall. A lot of people don't understand what the wall means. The wall isn't from where the trigger sits. The wall is on a Glock right there. The wall refers to the point where the mechanism in the gun that's responsible for holding the firing parts back from going forward and firing the gun begin to disengage. So it's like the actual trigger pull part of the trigger pull. Whenever we talk about one-stage or two-stage triggers or these sorts of things, the first stage on a two-stage trigger is the slop or the take-up, and it's not the wall. The second stage you get to is the wall. In the case of a Glock, this is not the wall. Right there's the wall, right? There's the wall. This isn't the wall. That's the wall. A lot of people are also confused about, will Glocks have a trigger pull safety? That's true, but the test in question wasn't looking at, oh, what sort of foreign objects can you stick into the trigger guard that will pull the trigger on a Glock and not pull the trigger on a 320, right? That's not what that video was looking at, and so that's not relevant to this test. This test was looking at what in engineering we'd call sympathetic movement. Sympathetic movement refers to movement in a system which is beyond that which is sort of inherently intended. So in the case of the trigger pull system in a gun like the Glock, we'll be able to see the trigger pull is accomplished by the trigger bar back there. That piece is going to pull back and hold back and then disengage with the striker. And that's what lets the striker come forward, and that's what fires the gun. However, right, here's a little example of sympathetic movement. That trigger bar is coming down to make the striker release. There's wiggle up and down between the slide and the frame on a Glock. That sympathetic movement disengages the amount of interference between the trigger bar and the striker. That sympathetic movement can cause the gun to fire after the trigger is pulled back past the wall. Same on a 320, same on a Walthers, and all sorts of other guns, right? Lots of other guns have sympathetic movement that happens. AR-15s can have sympathetic movement. That's why the actual fit of your trigger pins to your receiver can matter, because if those pins don't fit tight relative to the trigger and relative to the holes in the receiver, you've got extra wiggle there, which can cause inconsistent trigger pull. And for competition shooting people, this matters because, like, within an ounce of trigger pull is important to them. For most people, this doesn't matter, right? This amount of wiggle on a Glock really doesn't matter. SIGs do have slightly more wiggle than this, and some 320s I've handled, but it's not enough wiggle that this becomes like a safety issue as people are trying to portray it. Anyway, with that discussed, right, this isn't what we're testing. We're not testing what can or can't pull a trigger, right? Paper towel roll can't pull a Glock trigger, probably can't pull a SIG trigger either, but that's not what we're looking at here. What we're looking at here is really a test of sympathetic movement. And the Glock will fail this test the same way a 320 does, but really what I want to get at is that this test is, nonsense, it's bogus, it's silly. So, in order to test this, what we're going to do is a little bit of math number science, which Wisconsin whatever gun guy should have done. So we'll pull the Glock to its wall, right? Just to show you guys, right? There's the wall. Really anything past that, and it goes off. So we'll pull it back to that wall, right? Stage it. And I've got a set of calipers that are already sort of marked out to that distance that you can see there, right? To the front of the trigger guard, to sort of the apex of the roundness of the trigger. We have it at about 1.2 inches, right? That's where it's locked in. That's where the calipers will fit, right? You can stick the calipers in there and hold the trigger with it, and it won't go off. And something I've got rigged up here is a nut and bolt that we can use to hold the trigger to the wall. And again, we're not testing the trigger pull safety here. It's not the point of this test. This test is to see sympathetic movement and whether or not it's an issue. But with the gun held in this position, right, we can see relative to the calipers, the trigger is really not depressed much past that wall. If anything, it's about a millimeter. And if we take the slide at this point and wiggle it, the gun will release the striker. This is because of sympathetic movement, right? If you get the gun to the wall and then just a little bit past there, just the right amount past there, however long this is relative to its impingement on the trigger, and then wiggle the slide, it will drop the striker. Now, I saw a lot of people hypothesizing, well, it wouldn't set off a primer in a Glock. And I think this is really sort of indicative of the big issue with the whole saga here is people that are upset about the 320 being unsafe don't understand how the 320 works, and they definitely don't understand how their Glock works, because they'd be willing to say that, oh, there's no way that this would ever set off the primer because the trigger is fully pulled in the Glock and it releases the striker, and Glocks don't usually fire whenever you release the striker. I mean, that's just sort of a ridiculous thing to insist on, right? Because it most certainly will release the striker and you pop off a case, right? It's not like a light primer strike or anything, right? It goes off, and it's the way the silly thing works, right? So hopefully from this video we've been able to glean a slightly better than an ape's understanding of how guns work. It's how they've worked for a long time. This doesn't mean the Glock is unsafe. This particular test of sympathetic movement does not mean the 320 is unsafe. There may be sympathetic movement issues in the 320 otherwise that make it unsafe, but what's really being tested here is, can you pull the trigger on a gun and have it fire? And the answer is yes. That's not really a big revelation, though. We sort of expect that because we describe a Glock as being reliable because it does this, and a 320 to some extent, right, does this as well. Doesn't make any of them unsafe. It's just sort of how they work. Anyway, I hope this video has been educational, if not a little bit informative, to help you guys better understand why this test, as it's being called, isn't useful. It doesn't tell you anything, right? It's a negative feedback loop where it's like, look, a SIG performs in a certain way where it sets a round off. This is so scary. Well, so does a Glock. It's not scary. It's just how they work. Anyway, I will see you guys later.